All right, we will bring the TAC meeting to order. I'd like to welcome our TAC members. We have also included the data subcommittee members, and several of the high-frequency trading subcommittee members are here as well, so I appreciate everybody's participation, and I certainly appreciate the participation of our witnesses as we have 6 panels today, and we'll have a lot of people coming through. So we have several topics today. When we started formatting this meeting agenda, it was all about the data. And so the main topic today will be focusing on swap data reporting. And much like Thomas Edison's sentiment, he said the value of the idea lies in the using of it, and the value of data lies in using of it. And in other words, it's one of those things for the swap data it's one thing for the swap data reporting to be mandated by Dodd-Frank and the Commission regulations, and it's quite another for it to be flowing properly from reporting entities to the SDRs and then ultimately to the Commission itself for our efficient access and use in surveilling our markets. So I want to thank the TAC for working at the data subcommittee level to make recommendations to the TAC and ultimately to the Commission a year ago. We're going to come back and revisit some of those recommendations that you had then and say, wow, we should have paid attention to this a little more closely when developing our rules. And so the first data panel today, we will hear from market participants, kind of all walks of life in the market, and to give their perspective on the compliance challenges they've had in meeting the data requirements of the Commission and interacting with the SDRs. The second data panel will consist of the SDRs themselves, and we'll attempt to frame that debate with our Office of Market Oversight and Data and Technology, who have a presentation that they're going to make so we can begin to figure out these issues and how we are going to make data reporting an effective enterprise for this Commission. Then the third panel, we will be related to data, and we are here from TradeWorks, an organization that the SEC has hired to help them sort out their data issues. And I think this will give us a good opportunity to look at the possibilities of using data by the SEC, the CFTC, and kind of figure out what the art of the possible will be in dealing with big data challenges. As we go through these panels, I want to think of various tools that we need and what we can harness in order to address the challenges of swap data reporting. For example, I've called on a cross-divisional data unit to be created within the Commission of staff dedicated full-time to organizing and examining the data for completeness and accuracy. And we also need to work on interpreting and analyzing that data and developing the necessary analytical tools to identify market risk. Another potential tool will be the development of a written guidebook to articulate specific instructions to the market participants and SDRs in order to make the data reporting the process more efficient and consistent. Now, here I have at the desk our Part 20 rules, large trader reporting, quite a handful of rules. This is the how-to book to make those rules work. We published the rules, and then we had to publish the guidebook. You can see the difference. So I think, and this was quite simple. This was 226 pages and 24 pages here of rule telling you what to report, and this is how to report. Now, our SDR reporting is going to be much more complicated than that, and I suspect our guidebook, if you will, for SDRs and with fields well over the 40 or so in large trader will be much more complicated and much more extensive. So the paper is going to continue to flow around here. So I'd be very interested to understand the best way to address things like this, the same way we introduced Part 40 guidebook, or Part 20 guidebook, I'm sorry, in large trader. The thing that we need to focus on is the end result and the process. And we need to have interaction with the market participants, which is why we're here today, and to make sure that we are asking and demanding of them the things that can be easily done and efficiently done to give us the best data into the market, look into the market. I fully expect the TAC to focus on the SDR issues to continue well beyond today's meeting. We will continue to refine our priorities for reporting in order to reach the most effective and efficient ways to collect, manage, and utilize data to the best effect. These are big challenges, and I will continue to commit the TAC's attention and resources to help solve them and make sure the job is done. Now, we also have some other topics on here to follow up on previous meetings. Before we get to the data reporting panels, we will receive updates on 2 topics we've discussed in previous meetings. First, we'll hear from CME and NFA, the 2 SROs that are addressing the status of customer protection and technology and a solution to verify and reconcile account balances claimed by future commission merchants and their custodian banks. As you will recall, these measures were initiated at our emergency TAC meeting last July in response to the Peregrine Financial Group debacle and MF Global, and we also held a discussion at our October 30th meeting in Chicago. Since then, the technology solution has been launched and much progress has been made, so we look forward to hearing to follow up with that group and to understand what the status of that is. And we'll also hear from the technology entity Alphametrics, who has worked to implement that solution. After that, we'll hear from an update from FIA on the status of the compliance of Rules 1.73 and 1.74 relating to the timely acceptance and rejection of clearing. Last but not least, I've added a session to the agenda to focus on last week's Twitter hack and the market's reaction to the event. It's something that needs to be discussed, and what better place to do it when you have a room filled with technology experts. Rather than applying a shoot first, aim later strategy, I'm going to have an open discussion with all the TAC members, including the exchanges, where the market reaction took place, and to understand how the implications, concerns, and possible solutions. The social media genie is out of the bottle, and rather than attempt the impossible of trying to put it back in the bottle, we need to figure out a way for our markets and the regulators to respond to these new market forces. Again, I'm grateful for everybody's attendance, participation here today, and I'm thankful for our panelists. So let me turn to the chairman for any remarks he might have.
I thank you, Scott, for your leadership in bringing this committee together. It's been a great effort of yours, but you've done an excellent job throughout the years, and this couldn't come at a more timely moment. The TAC Advisory Committee, I want to thank you as well. Now, why is it such a timely moment? For 2 reasons. One, we've had a very real change since your earlier meetings. We've had a paradigm shift that now the swaps market is moving into implementation of Dodd-Frank reforms. This means that we, for the first time, have real-time reporting. We have 75 swap dealers registered. We have clearing that's being phased in between March and September this year, and we have reporting to the swap data repositories already underway. But secondly, as Scott so said, and so much has been reported to in the press, we live in a time that technology is constantly changing. And this is generally a good thing. Innovation in our society, whether it's in the markets, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in our day-to-day life, and all one has to do is look in the kitchen and see how wonderful technology is and how much easier things are even today than 40 years ago. So there's a paradigm shift in the swaps market as it's come to more transparency and central clearing, but there's also a continual shift, one might say paradigm shift as well, with technology. And we always need to adapt and adjust our rules to make sure that the market ultimately benefits from transparency, but also has a sense that there's some oversight of these markets. Now, regarding data and the panels we'll see on data, there is and has been a full commitment from the G20. That's the 20 leading nations around the globe and jurisdictions. Europe is in there as well. And it's been there since 2009 to gather data into trade repositories so that regulators, central bankers, finance ministers around the globe can get a sense of these important markets, this $600 trillion marketplace we call the swaps marketplace. And here in the U.S. and a number of other countries, we now have data repositories registered and reporting that information. But I think it's sort of natural that we have some growing pains. And I'm glad that we're going to have not one, but I guess 2 panels really to discuss this today. For me, I think that it's clear what the regulators and the finance ministers around the globe were saying. They want a place where they can go and sort and search data. I say sort and search data, and it's accessible. Congress put into the statute that it's directly electronically accessible for the regulators. That means it's not a report. It's not necessarily a summary, but a regulator can go in and see trade by trade. And that We can aggregate it by counterparty, by reference rate, by trade date, and use modern technology to do that. We're not there yet. This is natural growing pains, but I think today's process will help us get along the way, and maybe a guidebook, hopefully a little shorter than this one, but maybe a guidebook similar to this will help as well. We're also going to hear further about customer protection, and we have put out rules working with the self-regulatory organizations like CME and the NFA about direct electronic access to bank account and custodial statements. So I look forward to hearing from you all today on how that's working so far. Our rules haven't been finalized, but you've started with the self-regulatory organizations to do that. And post the events of last year, particularly at Peregrine, this is a critical issue. And then, of course, I'm glad that Scott's put a little panel on, a small panel at the end, which will probably, maybe that's why we have the cameras here today, with regard to last week's events. You know, as technology changes our financial system and the rules in place need to be resilient. And as sure as there were bad actors putting out false information 100 years ago into the marketplaces, and all we need to do is read about the late 19th century and the wonderful but sometimes heart-wrenching stories about false information and runs that were created in the markets of that era. It's sure to be the case that 100 years from now that people will try to put out false information into markets. They'll use new technology, things that will make Twitter and Facebook look old style 100 years from now. But I think as regulators, we need to be resilient as well and continue to update what we do to promote transparency and protect the markets. And make sure that false information is not put out in the markets. I mean, that's one of the things we're even doing over with regard to LIBOR and Euribor, that false information is not put out into the market. I think that we do need to finalize a concept release that we've been working on for many moons here at the CFTC. My hope is that we could actually put out a concept release which is about risk controls and system safeguards for automatic trading environments. We've talked about it. Sometimes I reference it as testing and supervision, but last week events reminds me once again, and I've been chatting with fellow commissioners. I think we will do that in the next month to 2 months and put that out and get the benefit of the public comment on it. I think also we need to finalize something that sounds in the weeds, but it's called ownership and control reporting, which we proposed, and it's now in front of my fellow commissioners, but I think the staff's done an excellent job so that we can know the actual owners and controllers of futures accounts in a similar way to what's in the swap data repositories for swaps. And yes, as a final note, we do need more resources here at the CFTC. If we don't have the technology resources to keep up, then all the data in the data repositories, all that's being done out there in the marketplaces, it's going to be hard for us to be nimble and be aware of what's going on. So I thank you, and I thank Scott for putting this together.
Thank you very much. With regard to the testing and supervision, we're really ready to use this commission once we get it out and we have the benefit of getting public comment. I think we will schedule another TAC meeting to address that specifically. And so I think we'll have maybe this summer, our next meeting, we can address the high frequency trading and market controls directly.
That would be terrific. And I know that we've all worked very closely, particularly, though I want to applaud your work and Commissioner Chilton's work for getting this document through.
Happy to do it. Commissioner Summers.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you all for being here today, and especially thanks to Commissioner O'Malia for chairing this advisory committee. When he took the lead on this advisory committee that had sort of been dormant for a few years, I think none of us really realized how important the role of this advisory committee would be in helping us to resolve some of the challenges that we're having in implementing the rules surrounding Dodd-Frank. I think as we review some of the issues that are on the agenda today, it's important for us to continue to review the costs and benefits of the requirements that the Commission has put into place and the benefits to our regulatory goals and making sure that those are level with the costs to the industry. I think that we need to continue to make sure that these requirements are reasonable and make sense. And although we may have a long way to go in resolving some of these growing pains as we implement Dodd-Frank, the topics that we're talking about today are extremely important for us to review and to listen to you as participants here and the panelists and members of this advisory committee. So thank you for holding this meeting.
Commissioner Chilton.
Thanks, and thanks, Commissioner O'Malley, for your really just incredible work on this and on this concept release too. But the amount of time you've spent on this is a whole lot more than the rest of us. I know Jill spent a lot of time traveling, so I can't say, I guess, more time than traveling, but the time that you spend on it every day is really invaluable. And we're not supposed to talk about, where things are like this concept release, and so I won't talk about specifically, but there are a lot of really good things in there, and thank you for that. It just seems like every time we meet, there's another meltdown moment taking place, whether or not it's Knight Capital or the Facebook IPO or the hack attack last week. And for me, what it raised was there's a confluence of the social networks and the markets that we hadn't really noticed before. Obviously, things that are out there impact the markets, but it really wasn't the social network to the extent that we saw it last week. And so that comes on the heels of the SEC allowing for registrants to go ahead and put forth information about earnings, et cetera, in whether or not it's Twitter or Facebook or other social media. And I just think that a lot of firms have, over the years, looked at social media as more of a marketing tool as opposed to something that can be interrelated with their trading computer program. So it just raises a question, we can get to it later, as to whether or not there's anything that needs to be done. And I'm not suggesting that something should. Maybe everybody will just supersize their cybersecurity regime out of the goodness of their heart or because they think it's in their business interest. But I think it's something we need to consider, and as Commissioner O'Malley said, maybe we'll think about including something like that in this document that I hope we can review later. So I'm pleased that we have in the meeting. I thank everybody for coming. I know it's a big deal. There's lots of folks, and it takes a lot of time to travel, but we really do appreciate it. Thank you.
I just wanted to add one more thing, because I think what we're all chatting about towards the end of today with regard to the Twitter, and I noticed Commissioner O'Malley handed me a journal article as well, was also highlighted by the Financial Stability Oversight Council last week in its annual report. It was organized around 7 themes, but one of the themes that this council of regulators that includes the Federal Reserve and Treasury and the SEC and ourselves and was operational risks. And just that we as a council all recognize that with enhanced technology, we also end up with, whether it's the events that we've looked at in the last year around Knight Capital or CBOE and so forth. So it's these operational risks that are also part of a theme that the council picked up.
Maybe you could get me invited to one of those meetings. Let's start with our first panel. We're going to talk about the customer protection technology solution that's been initiated by our SROs, NFA, CME, and has really provided us a great solution going forward that will enable us to check, that does enable us, it's no longer a vision, it's actual reality, that does enable us to check on customer funds, where they are at all times. And we get these on a T+1 basis, and no longer can somebody dip into the customer funds over a 20-year period and get away with it. We're going to know immediately. And so I don't know who wants to go first. You want Chris? You're going to go first. So Chris, Brian, and then Alex.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner O'Malley. I'm going to start, and then Brian, and I'm going to be brief, and then Brian's going to talk about their experience from the CME, and then we're going to hear from Alex Kentz from Alphametrics. And I, too, would like to chime in and thank you for your leadership for the Technology Advisory Committee and to the Commission for having us all here, because I get to tell a good story amongst all of the challenges and dead ends that the industry faces these days. This is a story that's a good one that came out of this committee. It was in July after the Peregrine thing, and we were using at NFA, and I think also at CME to some degree, econfirmation.com, which was a manual basis of going in and checking bank balances, and it was NFA's insistence that Wes Wassendorf had to give his authorization to confirm the bank balances, which uncovered the fraud. At the July, I think it was in July, at this committee, Commissioner O'Malley was pressing me to ask if there wasn't a way that the industry could come up with a technology solution to be able to check these bank balances online. And honestly, I came on behalf of NFA and its board and talked about the vision of something like that, and a little bit winging it because we weren't exactly sure what that would take and what that would cost. And it was soon after that when I got back to Chicago, and my friends at Alphametrics, Alex and Mikas Kins and Dennis Czar called and said, you guys know, Chris, that we have a technology that could probably do what it is that you all at NFA and CME are looking for. That led to lunch outside at Ceres with Dennis Czar and David Young and Ken Haas from NFA and myself, where we explored this. And then that led, of course, to a high-level discussion with CME, who I think was also talking to Alphametrics already on their own at that point. And that quickly led to things. And then, of course, the due diligence that's involved in looking into Alphametrics, if the two regulatory organizations are going to trust this technology. As we all know, sometimes the needs of one organization, the technology needs of one organization may be close to the fit of what another organization has built, but it's not always perfect. And so over the course of the fall, we had to pass our rules and get them in place at NFA, which went into effect February the 13th of this year. Then we came to conclude, the two organizations came to conclude that the Alphametrics solution was a good one. And so I'd like to make a couple of quick points, and that is that the system is being implemented in phases. And the first phase covers bank depositories. As you all know, good seg locations are also brokerage firms and other places, but we began with the bank depositories, which is the majority, of course, of the seg funds and certainly would have prevented the Peregrine problem. So both of the organizations, NFA and CME, are using this third party, Alphametrics 360, to collect the cash and securities balances on a daily basis. NFA's FCMs have a total of 172 seg accounts at 15 banks, while CME has almost 2,100 accounts at 40 banks. So their task is a lot bigger than NFA's. But again, the two organizations worked closely and worked well together in trying to implement the solution. But it's very important to note that the third party's role is to collect the data from the banks and to send it to NFA and CME, and Alphametrics doesn't play a role in analyzing the data or reconciling the data, which is important to keep in mind. They're providing the technology. CME and NFA have developed automated systems which alert the staff to material differences in these comparisons so they can follow through with analysis and perform reconciliations. And the amount in the beginning was 5%, and we've quickly been shrinking that as we've gotten some experience with it. Most of the exceptions are issues of reporting or issues of some out trade or something like that, but they can quickly detect it and then be in touch with the FCM as to what the nature of that is, or what the nature of the discrepancy is. So with the banks essentially complete, NFA and CME are going to be moving on to phase 2 of the project, which will cover, as I mentioned, the balances between the clearing brokers and the clearing houses. NFA and CME are going to split this effort for this phasing, with NFA establishing the requirements for the clearing broker balances and CME handling the clearing houses. Beginning this month, NFA started to meet with clearing FCMs to discuss their capabilities for providing this data, and that's for instance as to why the two organizations are going to split this effort. NFA is doing some initial research, which is something that I would really like to see, into confirming the assets held in pools. This is complex and a large technology challenge because there are so many pools. There are many more pools than there are FCMs. The pool frauds typically don't get the sort of press that the FCM frauds get. They're usually much smaller, but there are more of them. Somebody making off with somebody's money in a pool, to me, while it may not get the press of what happens in a fraud like Wassendorf's at Peregrine, and it may not be as large an amount of money of $200 million, but the person that's got money in that pool has been harmed just as much by their money being stolen by a criminal pool operator. And it would be great if NFA could get to balance these reported balances in these pools, but that's going to take some time to try to deploy this technology. But it looks like this technology is one that can do that for the pools. And most importantly to me is, and the board from my chair at NFA, is that this was a very good example of the way a technology that was developed on behalf of the investors by private enterprise on behalf of investors was something that we were able to use on the regulatory side and get us to market quickly. The amount of time that it took for us to get to market for due diligence, exploring the technology, and deploying it in a matter of months, in comparison to having to try to build that, pay for it, and then all of the issues that go along with the testing of building something, having it be cutting edge, all of those issues, I shudder to fear at how long that would have taken. We needed a solution to get to market fast to check these balances. And this was a very good example of the way the regulators work together with the private enterprise to bring a solution that will work. I don't know for how long, but for certainly the foreseeable future or a couple of years, this technology works at least, maybe longer, but this technology's worked very well. So with that, I think you probably want to hear also from Brian and then from Alex, and then of course I'm available for any questions, particularly from my chair at NFA.
Thank you, Commissioner. And on behalf of the CME Group's work with the NFA, first of all, Chris has done a very detailed overview of where we're at with the implementation of this mechanism. We are pleased to report to the Commission today that from the CME's perspective, we currently receive bank depository information from 2,083 accounts, which represents all material bank depository balances. This covers all 46 FCMs that maintain customer balances. And as of the current date, the cash balances that have been received from AM360 represents over 99% of all cash balances that are held at CME DSRO FCMs. In taking that information in, since we effectuated this in the middle of March and the NFA in the middle of February, both regulators have done reconciliations utilizing their analytics that they built internally. CME, we performed automated comparisons of 2,914 segregated balances since we went live with our system, and I believe the NFA did some over 2,000 themselves. As a part of this, we look for any materiality events. Where those triggers, as Chris has alluded to, did unveil themselves. For the most part, those were reporting issues between the firms, Alphametrics, and the depositories that were able to be validated and reconciled. As we move towards phase 2, we think that given what's been achieved to date so far, we've learned a lot in the context of what can be done in a fairly accelerated path when you have two major regulators coming together and trying to find a solution that has worked very well for our regulatory means. It's our goal as part of phase 2 to be able to onboard accounts at clearinghouses and carrying brokers internally by the end of this year.
How many carrying brokers are there out there? Do you have a sense of what that number is?
The carrying brokers? I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. It's not a number I'm armed with.
Okay. Anything else?
No, that's it.
Alex, you're up.
Good morning. My name is Alex Kims. I'm the CEO of Alphametrics, and I want to start off by thanking the CFTC and Commissioner O'Malley for inviting Alphametrics and to speak today, as well as the NFA and CME for having me participate on their update. What is Alphametrics? Alphametrics is a company that has built a business based on investor demand for transparency. I myself have been in the hedge fund and managed futures industry for nearly 20 years. For about a decade, I was a fund of funds, and as I managed my fund of funds, I felt that it was quite ironic that as an institutional investor allocating hundreds of millions of dollars, there were no tools out there to help me with not just daily or intraday or daily, but anything less than monthly in terms of seeing the performance and status of my funds. So lo and behold, as a fund of funds in the 90s, I built some technology that started to process very simply some of the accounts, some of the managed accounts I started receiving from various managed futures managers. And it was a case of be careful what you wish for, because when I started getting the transparency, I remember getting a stack of papers about an inch thick on my desk in the morning, and that was my transparency. And I remember lamenting, I wish I was just, I wanted to know if I was long the S&P 500, which would have taken us a month to figure out. And as I searched for a way to aggregate, there was nothing readily available. And I found it ironic that in the retail, let's say, equity trading market, investors had already, by the mid-'90s, late '90s, at their fingertips streaming information. But here I was as an institutional allocator, and there was nothing of the sort. The further I found, once I started building it, as we had investors come in to do due diligence on us and review what we were doing, I found I lost their attention quite frequently, because as I was explaining our investment methodology and procedures, we had screens on our walls, much like these screens around the room, and it had moving real-time profit and loss and risk information. And they would tell me one after another, "Hey, Alex, this is very interesting, your guidelines and the way you do due diligence, but how do I get some of that? How do I see my funds moving like that and my P&L?" So I only had to hear that a few hundred times to think maybe there's a business idea. And that's in 2005. We started Alphametrics with a handful of fund of funds as our initial clients, and began a process of building technology, which we found that even in 2005, there were quite a few large institutions that were very interested in the concept of seeing their own portfolios. Obviously, that goes without saying that with the events of 2008, it was quite the catalyst for bringing us to the forefront in the investors' minds, as our product, in essence, is transparency. And that helped propel us to being one of the fastest growing companies in Chicago and so forth, all driven by investors who were willing basically to pay for data aggregation. So in short, the way we looked at it is we believed in free market principles for driving transparency problems and actually solutions to those problems. And again, in 2005, we would from time to time find pension fund investors, sovereign wealth, you name it, who would say, do I really need my data on a daily basis? Do I really need to see the granular level? We found post-2008, we really don't ever get asked that question anymore. What is it? What is in our DNA? How do we do this? Why is this different than any other group that we know of? Well, it started out for me, as I said, as a portfolio manager, what I thought was a simple problem. I just want to get my trades, aggregate them, and see what my P&L is, and see my profit and loss, and see what my risk is. And that's where I started discovering that data within the financial system exists in silos. There are many, many, many silos. And our technology doesn't differentiate between the silos, but some of those silos are banks, some of them are exchanges, some of them are hedge funds themselves. And what we found that as we started streaming managed futures and hedge funds throughout the day, creating a price and risk information that we one by one had to, in essence, map out nearly the entire financial system. That we right now aggregate data from about 4,000 hedge funds and managed futures funds. We are connected to approximately 300 FCMs, prime brokers, custodians, banks, you name it. These are all data sources for us. So a new hedge fund, a new bank is basically how we built our technology. It's just a form of mapping. We estimate that we have spent, in aggregate, several thousand man-years developing our, well, if you look at how the sausage is made, it's the meat grinder that takes the data and turns it into something that's usable for investors or regulators or even hedge funds themselves. We estimate that there's been as much as $100 million put into the technology to build this. It is complex because there's no real standardization of data across the financial system. The other thing we found is that obviously the common denominator to all financial instruments is cash. If you could reduce an instrument down to cash flow, you can then aggregate it any which way. And obviously with certain derivatives, over-the-counter instruments, it's a challenge to reduce it to a common denominator, but that's basically what this system does. And as Chris Haymeyer mentioned, that when the NFA post-Peregrine and the excuse me, and the CME were looking for a solution, we connected with them and said, in essence, we've spent years already building something that could potentially be of use. And we were already processing for a large number of institutional investors aggregate information on their own portfolios. So that said, the slide I have here shows that it was really about 84 days from sitting down and meeting to delivering the phase one, which is basically complete. We've got 71 different FCMs already being processed, and I think I have 95% with the CME. That's already 99%. So it's basically complete. But why were we able to do this in this type of speed? And what the reason why I'm presenting this is because the only thing that had to be adapted was just sort of the final, let's say, 1% of the project. The core, again, the meat grinder I mentioned, was already completely developed. And we are able to process not just bank account cash information, but also financial instruments. We're already processing, on average, about 7,500 instruments, treasuries, you name it, in these FCM accounts right now. And that's actually not even as large as the volume of within 200 hedge funds that we process, all sorts of esoteric instruments. So the machine is created. Now it's a question of looking at it and maybe turning it upside down and seeing, are there other uses for it? Are there other types of aggregation that can be mapped out and aggregated? And so that leads us to, I think, as was already mentioned, the phase two, where we're expanding from FCMs and the bank holdings of them to the clearing brokers and carrying brokers and clearing firms and so forth. So once again, Alphametrics thanks the CFTC, NFA, and CME. Thank you.
Thank you. The chairman mentioned that our customer protection rule has a proposal that would require each bank to give access, kind of login access, for each individual account to the commission and the relevant password. Now, in light of hacking and cyber issues that we're going to discuss later, we had a discussion in July about the issue of pushing out the data versus pulling the data, and trying to understand, was there an exposure issue? Do we create additional liability or really holes in the cybersecurity network if we have this login ability as opposed to collecting the data? I'm trying to understand what the advantages of one over the other, or is it redundant, what we're asking for in terms of being able to log in at will using a password, and who updates the password, and how do we keep all that straight? It seems from our standpoint to be monumentally difficult if we have staffing issues, how we're going to log into individual. How many, you mentioned over 2,000 accounts, Brian, that you were, so we've got over 2,000 accounts we would have to log into, and I guess it's a lottery which one we log into every day, but I'm just trying to understand the trade-off here. Haven't we solved this problem with this solution you've put forward?
One thing I will say is through the miracles of modern technology, there's about 70 carrying brokers, 50 of which are clearing members. Sure. Your question, and I sort of got that out there because your question becomes more complex once you get the carrying brokers on there, right? Then which carrying brokers can you log into? It's a push technology. The banks push the information to Alphametrics, and then the organizations then do the comparison. Don't I have that right, Brian? I don't know if that answers your question.
Alex, you can address
yes.
the issue of how you're going to protect this data.
Oh, sure. And just, sorry, finishing that point, for us, a push or pull technology, we've designed it to work either way. Different institutions have set up, files and file transfers differently. There's no like physical logging into a website and pulling. It's all automated machine to machine. One of the challenges why we weren't able to go to 100% right away day one is we'd already spec'd out and completed a way to communicate with some of the largest institutions, but there were a lot of much smaller banks and groups that didn't have push technology, which is probably easier to work with. So we had to work with them to implement a way to receive data, but in a process that was unattended and automated. Then further, I think the question was data. That is always our top concern. You hear people talk about cloud versus server and so forth, and we don't think there's one perfect solution for one versus the other. We'll use the internet and the cloud to where we think it's appropriate to aggregate, pull data, but all data is stored not connected to the internet on servers and very encrypted and so forth. And so we have that all in a separate company, a separate group within Alphametrics. It's a separate company called Alphametrics 360, which is a subsidiary. And so we've gone through SAS 70, SAS 70 compliance, Sarbanes-Oxley, so forth, to put in controls in place. But the idea is to remove any storage of data from harm's way in the internet, to only have bits and pieces out there at any given time, and then be transferring a daily file to the CME and the NFA. Tried not to get too technical there, but I hope that answered what you're looking for.
Just one other thing, Commissioner. The security, of course, is always an issue that has to be 24/7, earn your wings every day kind of thing. But the logging in thing at NFA, we've come to find that there's thousands of passwords, and this is a much more efficient way to monitor these balances, certainly the daily seg balances.
You had tried, I think you had contemplated a daily logging in strategy.
Well, I think we had used one before, too. And this is much more efficient, is what we found.
Okay.
Because the other ones can be prone, with you got all those passwords floating around, the other one can be prone to being hacked.
Right. Now, anybody that has a comment, you guys are all Technology Advisory Committee members. Anybody wants to raise something, just put your card up, jump in, does not matter. And we'll have any questions, answer any questions, or ask any questions you want. I don't know if any of my fellow commissioners have a question on this front. No? Do you have a time frame on when the next set of the carrying brokers and the clearing members?
I mean, our goal is to have that accomplished by the end of the year. We should be in a position, Chris, to be able to report our progress at the next TAC.
The pools issue is more complex. There are pool rules, the way I understand them, without quoting them, allow for pools to invest in a variety of different instruments. That gets more complicated in trying to balance it. I mean, in trying to confirm them. So that's going to take longer, but the phase 2 is just as Brian said by the next TAC.
Is there anything we can do to help you with the pool issue?
I can't tell you off the top of my head what that might be, but if I need some help, I'm going to ask you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So I assume that they are not held in necessarily bank accounts, and it's not all cash, it's not all
Correct.
securities, it could be
And-
metal?
And my feeling is if they're not current assets, how much of it is not in current assets? But it's going to take us a little while. But we're the board and the senior management at NFA is just organizational, and with Alphametrics, it's just a bigger project, and it's much more ours than this one is CME. First thing is phase 2.
Okay. Superna?
As the data sets are being designed, is it taking into account that, ultimately there may be a requirement to allow, either if it's an asset manager or the end user to also be able to view this data? And I ask this question because, we've recently experienced in another data exercise where, the SDR was not able to identify which asset manager may have, been the owner, of the transaction underlying. So the question is on the data set that's being currently developed. Is it taking account that ultimately either the asset manager or the end user may also be one of the viewable parties?
There hasn't been any discussion along the lines of that at the NFA, and I don't have any interest in Alphametrics, but Alex's description of going to different exchanges and different asset classes with his technology is one that might provide something like that for the industry, but that's more of a CFTC thing. So there hasn't been any discussion at NFA along those lines.
Nor the same for us at this point, but we can certainly take it under consideration with the Commission.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. It was very, very interesting. One of the questions that I was thinking about as you were talking, and I know you touched upon, cyber threats and so on. I was wondering what consideration was given to customer privacy and all the privacy considerations as you collect and aggregate data, and also as you disseminate the data. What are your thoughts around privacy?
That's a very, very good question. One of, security and privacy are at the utmost of importance of what we do. If we didn't respect security and privacy, we wouldn't have a business, because outside of this relationship, how we built the business is getting voluntary contribution of information. And so we've had to go a long way to demonstrate that that we put in a lot of security as well as privacy measures. And just for example, here with the NFA-CME relationship, we pull this data, but we do not process it or show it to anybody. It's pushed right to the NFA and CME. I don't have access to that in aggregate. It's really locked down. But separately on the rest of our business, it's basically data sharing is in essence, a private contract between the hedge fund and the investor, that the investor can request it, and then the managed futures fund or hedge fund can basically agree to share it. So it's a system like that we're running through our technology. So in the end, each entity is in control of their own data, and if they choose to share it, they're able to. We've built that technology, the bridge that allows them to do it efficiently, so they don't have to send files or do back office work, and that's really the principle that drives. That's why we also call it a marketplace, because it's a marketplace of information and data that they're sharing back and forth, and that's really what drives the sort of free market private sector element of it.
Okay, thank you.
Chris and Brian, one thing that occurred to me is we haven't talked about what the interaction after he pulls it, gives it to you for evaluation and look for any anomalies to make sure you've got all the data and all the money in the right spot at the right time. with the right banks, what interface do you have with the commission? Are we linked up to this system? Are we receiving reports?
I'll start. For any issues where we're finding materiality concerns in the normal course of conducting our reviews and exams, we will be in communication with our counterparts at the Commission. So we look at this in the context of performing our due diligence in terms of our overall financial monitoring of our firms.
I think it's probably similar at NFA, just from the board level. I'm not sure about the answer to that, but I would assume it's very similar. We are posting, as you know, at NFA, this FCM data twice a month on the website.
Can I just ask this question of both Brian and Chris? Given what you're doing already in the direct electronic access to accounts, do you think that Peregrine, that somebody could do that again today, April 30th?
Much harder. Yeah, I mean, it would take hacking, and it would take real computer technology sophistication that, I mean, it's like saying, could anybody hack the defense system, right? It's possible, but it is this is a significant advancement. It would be much more difficult.
And just so that listeners at home, because we do broadcast this, why is that? Just so in your own words, why is that which an operator at Peregrine could forge and fraudulently, doctor bank statements, why isn't that possible in this system?
And so in some ways, it's almost generational. The generation that learned how to doctor documents, that age group has been rendered irrelevant. They can't do that anymore. So is it possible down the road?
No, but why is that not possible?
The secure pushing of the data that comes from the bank.
So directly from the bank.
Directly from the bank into the Alphametrics 360 technology, into NFA and CME, where we compare it with what the FCM tells us. The $200 million that was missing from Peregrine would have been found the first day it was $7,000 and Russ had taken a check out.
Right.
So I would agree in the totality of the steps that we've taken in terms of customer protections. This is one major one, but there's been a number of steps that we have taken to lock up the ability for a firm to be able to take advantage of the data or the information that we saw in Peregrine. So it's the independent reporting that's coming and being pushed to us from the banks, the electronic reporting from the FCMs, doing those reconcilements on a near real-time basis to identify whether or not there's any anomalies and being able to act on them.
And all you're saying, Chris, is so yes, it's addressed the Peregrine forged doctor documents, but a new generation, maybe yet to be born, whether they can go into the computer system, sorry about this, Alex, but into Alex's computer system and doctor something.
Right, and hack a bank,
hack Alex's. So that brings us to the topics of later today about cybersecurity and so forth.
Correct.
Thank you.
What about the issue of MF Global, the thresholds with moving funds and excess funds, and when does it go into customer funds versus excess funds, and we're trying to understand that. How will that be solved?
Well, again, to my earlier comments, there's a number of steps that we've taken that require the CEO or the CFO of a firm to sign off and authorize any disbursements of funds in excess of a certain limit. And so there's a number of protocols that we've put in place since MF Global to be able to readily identify any transfers.
In addition to watching the customer balance. Okay.
And I think that these steps, which have been taken in coordination with the CFTC, but been taken by the self-regulatory organizations and many futures commission merchants, we should finalize in some federal rules, and that's what was out for notice and comment, along with other rules. But I think there are positive steps addressing some of the known problems that came out of the last 18 months.
I agree, and if I could, it was a result of this committee. It's a place where industry,
Plenty of credit to the committee.
where
And to
industry,
Scott O'Malia's leadership.
where
on this.
industry and the commission can collaborate on issues, and we can raise awareness to certain things where somebody could step forward with a technology solution. So hopefully today, as you all talk about various topics, that there'll be people that might step forward with a solution that could work between the private and the public.
Just a quick question. As I understand it, the information is aggregated and then pushed out to you folks. The question is, do you now have two aggregation units? You have one at Alphametrics, one at the NFA and CME, because that may create an issue of reconciliation if you're both collecting data versus just pulling it as you need it.
But I think
We conduct an aggregation across all of the FCMs as we're receiving that information so that we can reconcile what's been provided by Alphametrics compared to what the FCMs have individually reported to us. We have a system then that does that reconcilement.
But does that reconciliation go on continuously? Because as you build more and more data every day, the question is, do you go looking back to the very beginning and reconcile, or is it just as the data comes in and you assume the set that was done previously is accurate?
I don't have the answer to that question.
Because that could become an overwhelming task at the
Yeah.
end if you have data at Alphametrics as well as what's on site has to be reconciled.
I'd have to follow up on
Okay.
that one.
All right, we got started a little, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, John, sorry.
There's been some incidents where FCMs have had money in accounts that were not properly named. They didn't have customer segregated funds on it. There's been some fines by the commission as a result of that, with some fairly high profile cases. Does your system, does it verify those accounts as being customer segregated accounts? And how does it account for anomalies like we've seen where these fines have been created? Who wants to answer that?
I don't know the answer to it.
A sort of broader answer to that is that the general premise that we've built the whole system is a sort of trust but verify system, and it's under the premise that multiple unrelated entities won't corroborate information that's not true. So what our system does is try to find sources of data and then reconciles. And to answer the earlier question, the way we're doing the reconciliation is we can see when something changes, and then we will go back and we'll look at if there's a change. If there's no change, we leave the data alone. But in terms of how do you look at, let's say, customer seg accounts, is generally even the large banks and institutions are holding money at other institutions and so forth. And that goes back to, as we started with hedge funds, a medium to larger size hedge fund might have 10 or 20 prime brokerage, FCM, custodial relationships. So there are pieces of data at all of them. We're putting it together, and then we test it against something. Generally, if it's a hedge fund, there's a net asset value that you look at and so forth. And then nothing can be completely automated. If there's an error, a mismatch, then there are people that look at it. We, from our side, aren't looking at it. The NFA and CME are looking at the data on their side. But in general, that's the concept of how this works. And it is corroborating information across the system as straightforward as that.
John, I would comment from an exam perspective.
Because John, one piece that we put in the proposed customer protection, which I don't know that would be implemented yet, relates to acknowledgement letters. And that would add direct access to the acknowledgement letters and so forth, would add a little bit more to what you were saying.
And I would just add on to that this information would also be incorporated as part of our exams of the firm. So we do a deeper analysis into what is actually reported under their segregated funds.
It would just seem that, if there was a qualification check for the name to make sure that it says customer seg account, that you could catch that much sooner, as opposed to having something like that go on for months.
As I think you'll find some of our later discussion today, garbage in is garbage out. And if we can't get the basics handled in terms of what is or is not customer funds, we're going to have a hard time figuring out some of these larger data questions. So it's a great point, and it really starts with the quality of the information going in. Anybody else have any questions on this panel? We're going to go right to the next panel. Alex, thank you very much. We have Walt Lucan to update us on rules 1.73 and 1.74. These are a couple of rules that we are not Dodd-Frank related. The Commission has kind of leapt into and required some extensive technology requirements on the industry, some of which are available, some of which are not available. This was a topic that we attempted to get to in October at the FIA meeting in Chicago, but due to the storm, we couldn't get the right participants at the meeting due to travel plans and the hurricane, et cetera. So we're kind of picking up where we left off there. So, Walt, thank you very much for your participation.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman O'Malley, and I'll try to catch us up a bit here. But I've been tasked with the exciting and riveting task of talking about 1.73 and 1.74, which are correlation rules. 1.73 dealing with risk limits that clearing FCMs have to put on any type of transactions coming through the clearing firm. On the flip side, 1.74 dealing with straight-through processing, so that once the clear trade comes into the system, that it's cleared within a certain period of time. I wanted to first tackle 1.73. As you recall, 1.73, as Scott mentioned, was briefly talked about last October at the TAC meeting in Chicago. But 1.73 requires clearing FCMs of a registered DCO to establish risk limits and to screen for compliance with those risk limits. This rule was scheduled to go into effect last October 1st. Because of the varied way that execution happens in the futures industry, clearing FCMs found it very difficult to come into compliance with this requirement. In particular, FIA raised last summer two issues that were really challenging for clearing FCMs. One, dealing with give-ups, in which an executing broker has to give up a trade to a clearing firm. Because the clearing firm doesn't have a relationship with the customer, it's difficult in that situation for the clearing firm to actually screen for orders. And the second is bunched orders, in which an asset management firm or an account manager pools customer funds and gives it to an initial clearinghouse, which is allocated at the end of the day to several ultimate clearing firms for clearing. So again, because of the network effect, the externalities of those types of trading situations, it was very difficult for risk limits to be put on those types of execution manners and also to be screened. So as a result of that, the CFTC last September 26 provided some relief to the FCM community in regards to give up transactions and bunched orders through June 1st of this year. That date is approaching, so we wanted to give the committee an update on where things stand. After the relief was given last fall, we sat down with many of the clearing FCMs in New York and had what we called a vendor showcase. And Greg was part of that group, but all day in a very large conference room with coffee and donuts for the guests, we brought in vendor after vendor after vendor to see if there was an outside technology solution to help us with this problem. I think what we quickly learned, because of the network effect of the problem, is that one vendor, although could solve pieces of the problem, couldn't serve and solve for the entirety of the problem. And so we had to go back to the drawing board and come up with an independent solution that FIA has helped to craft. And I think after working with the CFTC and Rick and some of his team and Ananda's shop, we've found out that the best and straightforward way to do this was to enter into a simple screening agreement between the executing firm and the clearing firm. And this would be very simple. Again, they would agree to a limit based on these screening agreements. These screening agreements could be housed within FIA's eGUS system eGust is the give-up repository that FIA runs. These screening agreements could be housed there as well and automated through the eGust system. That allows people to update limits over time. If the creditworthiness of a counterparty changes, they can go into eGust and change those limits. And notification and the approval system is all automated so that eGust makes sure that all the right people are approving that, and it's all in a repository for those parties to see. So far, there has been good take-up of that solution with the industry. To date, we have nearly 800 screening agreements in processing in our eGust systems, with nearly 50 executed fully already. So, with roughly a month to go before the June 1st deadline, we feel we're well on our way to being in compliance on the give-up side of this 1.73 problem, and hopefully can report closer to the June 1 deadline, we'll be fully in compliance. Now, dealing with bunched orders, a similar problem with bunched orders. We took the solution on give-ups and tried to apply it to bunched orders. And remember, bunched orders are the situation in which an account manager bunches or pools orders on behalf of clients, gives it to an initial clearing firm, and then it's allocated at the end of the day to several clearing firms. We thought, again, could we use a simple screening agreement between the account manager and the ultimate clearing firm in order to end up with, a similar screening agreement where the account manager agrees to screen for some simple limits, and that could be either housed with eGust if possible, or just independently not housed, just executed between the account managers and the ultimate clearing firms. The challenge with bunched orders versus give-ups is, one, we're dealing with a community outside the FCM community, so it involves account managers and buy-side firms. So the challenge of getting everybody on board with a standardized screening agreement is difficult, and also just sheer numbers. Unlike give-ups, which we're dealing in the hundreds of give-up screening agreements we have to execute, we're probably talking the thousands for bunched orders. So that has made it a challenge to get into compliance by the June 1st deadline. I think we have been in discussions with the CFTC as well as the buy side about ways to in bulk get the consent and get some of these agreements into place in what I would call an absent objection. Meaning that the consent agreement goes out, and if firms would object to it, unless they object to it, the account managers would agree to screen for certain limits communicated to them. And this would be a way for the FCMs and the account managers to get into compliance by the June 1 deadline and to get many of these agreements into place at the same time. If that is not an acceptable solution to the community, we would have to enter into individual negotiations with thousands of these agreements, which would certainly get us past our June 1st deadline and not into compliance. So we have been in discussions with trade associations, with SIFMA AMG, with MFA, with ICI, and we're talking to other influential members of the buy side to talk to them about this concept and to try to see if we can get agreement with, again, a very simple screening agreement to get us into compliance by the June 1st deadline. So those are both the give-up arrangements and the bunched order arrangements. I do want to touch on 1.74, and then we'll certainly answer questions after that as well. So 1.74, as I mentioned, requires clearing FCMs to accept or reject a trade within 60 seconds of its submission to the clearing FCM. A similar 60-second requirement is in place on CCPs after an FCM submits a trade for clearing. Last October, when this rule was to take effect, FCMs individually offered alternative compliance manners under 1.75 to meet this rule, and the CFTC granted relief through the end of the year. An additional extension of relief was granted through February 1st of this year to find an alternative method for compliance with this 60-second requirement. FCM's concerns were, in order to get to straight-through processing, They also recognize that there may be exceptions and that there will be times when they couldn't get 60 seconds. It could be operational issues as we're moving into mandatory clearing. It could be complex trades in which there's several legs to a swap trade that may not be coming into the clearing FCM at the same time. Or it could be simply a large notional amount coming in that the FCM, clearing FCM, has to guarantee that they may want to do additional credit checks. So we had, during this relief period of time, tried to submit an alternative compliance regime, having worked with some buy-side firms on this, in which there would be a ratcheting up over time, an allowance for exceptions, and a ratcheting up over time of the 60-second requirement, so that there could be exceptions and also reporting of those exceptions. So the CFTC could gather data, they could see where the trends were, where the out trades were, and to make further refinements to this rule as time went on. Unfortunately, that alternative compliance regime was not accepted by the CFTC. The March 11th mandatory Category 1 deadline came into be. I think the firms, just anecdotally, we have heard from firms that there have been rejections of trades during this period of time. I think people are also looking to the Category 2 June deadline as the next ratcheting up of clearing that may cause additional rejections. The CFTC, in talking to the Division of Clearing and Risk, I understand that they have asked for some data from the clearing firms in order to understand trends in this area. So it's our hope at FIA that we'd want to work with the Commission as they get more data, they see whether rejections are occurring and whether there's trends, that we can develop an exceptions process if that's appropriate, and work with people as we go through this transition in mandatory clearing so that we can get to straight-through processing, which is something that FIA supports. So I will cease fire there and turn it over to the chairman for questions.
Thank you very much. And this is an area where our rules are just goofy. We've tried to come up with a solution and put it on the industry, and we can talk about cost-benefit analysis, whether we got that right or not, and what it took to get to this papering and repapering the industry and trying to get all the account managers to sign up for this. And maybe Superna can chime in as to what her thoughts might be on bunched and give-up orders. I mean, these were massive amounts of agreements, in addition to all the other agreements we're requiring you to repaper through external business conduct standards, et cetera. So while our heart is in the right place, I do know that we've kind of missed the technology boat in trying to figure out how to do this. And congratulations on solving the bunched orders, because it was a well-defined community. But it doesn't sound like, no, did I get it wrong? The give-ups you got right. You've got a solution for. The bunched orders we're still kind of searching for. And then on 1.74, it confounds me. You sent a letter in asking under our rules for an alternative compliance program back in January 29th, I believe. You received no official answer back on that. The rule says if you don't get an answer, it's deemed to be in place within 30 days. You probably contemplated that and said, we won't assume anything in this one, and didn't move forward on that. Now, apparently, we've sent a letter to the entire FCM clearing broker space and said, tell us how many trades you have made or have not made, or how you've canceled if have exceeded the 60-second requirement that we set under 1.74. Actually, we didn't set it under 1.74. We sent it in an email subsequent. So I'm really trying to understand how we've been completely transparent on this. And so now we're asking for all the same data that you offered to send us back in January in this new April letter. Is that your understanding of all this?
Yeah, and I think our clearing FCMs, they want to be in compliance. Certainly that is our goal, and we were trying to, because of the difficulty of not knowing if a trade is rejected or if the trade goes over 60-second, what is our obligation involved in that. We tried to develop, I think, a process in which we would agree that if there are exceptions, that we would be the first to tell you in weekly reports, here's the exceptions, here's why they ran over 60 seconds, and certainly, work with feedback with the CFTC to fine-tune this over time. I think because of the letters that went out, we're sort of getting to the same place that we had offered in January. But we want to work with the commission. If there's not a problem here, we'll be the first to say there's not a problem here. But we were trying to anticipate during this transitional time that, again, it's transitional, that we hope to, within a year, to be at 100% compliance within 60 seconds. But there's going to be, during these very difficult, uncertain times, during operational times, there may be exceptions to this process, and we just wanted to recognize that up front.
I guess I forgot to mention one other step, that we did provide LCH, which has the same 60-second requirement, additional relief for, I think until, John, when is it? How long do we give LCH relief?
May 17th.
May?
Yeah.
Okay. So the FCM's no relief, LCH some relief, or second relief. So we do have John Lawton here. Can you want to share any thoughts from the Office of DCR that had a role in all this?
As Walt mentioned, there were a couple of extensions granted. So I think the thinking was that the rule originally went into effect, was approved in April with an effective date of October. Then there was an extension granted in October, a second one granted in December, a third request in January. And I think the decision was there wasn't really a need for a third extension. And so the rule went into effect. And the reporting that Walt was talking about was in connection with the third request for extension. Subsequently, there were some press reports about there wasn't compliance. I mean, our informal view of it is there's been very good compliance, and we've talked to firms, we've talked to clearinghouses. We think there is very good compliance, but we saw these press reports, so therefore a letter went out to all the firms saying, please give us some data about the actual extent of your compliance since the effective date, which was March 1st, and then the shortened time frame as of February 1st and March 11th, which was the opening of the clearing mandate. So basically, the current letter that's out there is asking for reports from the firm about compliance since the effective date of the rule. We expect to be getting those reports shortly. We will be reviewing them. We will be in consultation with FIA and the firms to talk about the data that we get to see what kind of results we actually get from the reporting, if there are anomalies, what the situation is. But again, informally, it looks like there's probably very good compliance out there right now.
And I would just add to that, and we appreciate John's efforts to get more data here, but the truth is we can be in compliance if we set things to auto-reject. And so at 60 seconds, we can auto-reject and be in compliance with this rule. I think that the alternative costs, to this is that had we had a bit more time, we might, either to do credit checks or if there may be operational issues, we might not have had to auto-reject, and maybe Subcommittee can even talk to the problems when the rejection occurs, that creates uncertainty with resubmissions of swaps, and so that was the only issue. It's not an issue of getting into compliance for our folks. Our folks can do that through auto-reject, but the question is what the alternatives could have been had we had more time.
John, why is it that the January 29th letter was the alternative compliance that was going to provide reports on any exceptions to the trade? Why wasn't that adopted or accepted or even responded to, actually?
I think the view was that there had been plenty of notice and that it was appropriate, particularly to give some lead time before the clearing mandate started, to have the straight-through processing rule in place.
But they weren't asking for relief to the rule. They were just saying that if they had thresholds over 90%, that they wouldn't have to auto-reject, and they could send you what exceeded that threat. I mean, they were going to be in compliance. You were getting the straight-through process.
Yeah, they were asking for a later effective date, essentially saying, we'll give you reports and you can review the reports, and we expect to be largely in compliance, but we're actually asking for the effective date to be later.
Subcommittee, do you have any thoughts on either one of these rules?
How long do I have?
I know Commissioner Summers wanted to ask some questions, so you have until she gets back.
Okay. I think that it's important to understand that, from a futures perspective, the system's been working, and if we were given enough time, that the solution that's being developed for swaps, as far as credit limit checking goes, if that was allowed to materialize, it could be extended to futures, and I think that would be, at least from a BlackRock perspective, a much more optimal solution than putting in place an assessment letter, which, if you can elaborate a little bit about what that means, it would help us. So that's, on the future side, something that we would like the Commission to explore to give an extension. As far as the rejections of trades take place, it's important to understand that in this new world of cleared swaps, a trade flow will interact with 6 different entities, versus a bilateral trade that's between 2 parties. And the interoperability of those 6 entities is critical to straight-through processing. So the industry infrastructure is not ready to allow for a rejected trade to be resubmitted in a timely manner at this state. I think, given a couple of months, the middleware providers will have the solution that if a trade is rejected, the buy side or, the client leg of the trade, or actually it could even be, the executing dealer, would be able to efficiently resubmit the trade, which would ultimately lead to the trade clearing versus a trade break. And that's, very important. The other piece that I think hasn't been mentioned here that, I just want to draw some attention to, as this rule is being implemented, auto rejection, may be, put in place, and some FCMs have already put that in place. The liability of a trade rejection and a trade break, that's being passed on to the end user. And that's not trivial. It's being passed on through documentation. If an FCM is not being able to comply with the 60-second rule, or there's a carve-out that if there's a trade rejection because of this, the FCM wants indemnification of any market loss or any trade loss associated with that. And, the buy side, whether it's an asset manager or, it's the end users, we're really not in a position to fight this. At least, I'd like to just let the Commission know that, this is part of the documentation, and given that the mandate for clearing, March 11th has already gone by and June 10th is around the corner, there is really no room for negotiation from the buy side. So, if possible, do consider all these as extensions are required or, or requested, as well as understanding that in the swap world, we will have a solution that ultimately can be applied to futures.
Can you describe who the 6 entities are?
The executing dealer, the client, ultimately there will be a CEF, then the trade will go to an affirmation platform. The affirmation platform, will send the trade to a CCP. CCP will send it to an FCM, vice versa, and there'll be an SDR. John, I can send you, the layout, because, we've got a layout that shows, all these entities. So, all I'm saying is that, ultimately, I think we're going to have an STP process that's going to work efficiently, but just allow time that these pieces of interoperability are allowed to be developed in the optimal way, and lack of time doesn't make us end up with a solution that is suboptimal, because it's not easy to rectify it.
Do you want to touch on the allocation issue under 1.73? I mean, do you have any perspective on how difficult it will be for FIA to organize a repapering on give-ups, to do a risk check?
The risk check for the futures component of it is going to be a very onerous task, because today what we have is we have agreements in place with executing counterparties and FCMs that essentially, the tri-party agreements that essentially allow for the transfer of risk once a futures trade is executed to the clearing member. And, these are done, on an umbrella basis and, the third-party agreements. In order for us to be able to repaper that for futures where there is a credit limit given at the account level by the clearing member, and then the executing dealer having access to that will require almost the same paperwork that we have in place today that we had to do for swaps. So the proposal was, if we had a credit hub in the middle, and the credit hub were to receive limits from every FCM at the account level, at the allocation level, or sub-account level, and then that hub were to be used to do any type of limit checking when an executing dealer, was going to trade, and the account manager would to do a screening on a pre-trade basis. That would allow for a lot less paperwork or repapering, but the right screening that, that should satisfy the rule. I mean, from a risk perspective, at least in futures, we don't necessarily think we are solving for anything.
Thank you, Scott. Just in response to that, I worked with Walt extensively on the futures side of 173, particularly with regards to give-ups. And as Walt alluded to, we did have a vendor showcase where we had several people come in to discuss their proposals for compliance around the give-up component of 173 for futures. And one of the participants we had there was talking very much about a central credit check model, which their proposal was to actually integrate that into the matching engine for the exchange. One of the things that we were concerned about, and it certainly became clear with our discussions with the various solution providers who are trying to come up with approaches for credit checking in futures, is it would be a radical change to the way the futures trading environment has worked on several levels. Firstly, it would require either the introduction of credit checking at the venue, or a separate credit hub that would be called either by the venue or by the execution systems that people are using. That would certainly take probably years rather than months to actually implement into the futures environment, which is why we went for the solution that meets the requirements of the rule with regards to the screening agreement, based on the fact that we actually do, pretty adequate credit checks on a near trade basis at most of the FCMs.
I think that's why this assessment letter that was discussed, it's important to understand what does that entail.
I mean, Walt, do you want to speak to that with regards to what the actual screening agreement is?
Well, it very closely follows the actual rule. So it just requires that the ultimate clearing firm and the account manager enter into an agreement on risk limits. And those risk limits, as John and his division has talked about, are very flexible in what those could be. They could be max order sizes. They could be fat finger limits. They can be a variety of different ways of measuring risk. Once that agreement is in place, the account manager would be required to screen for that with the ultimate customer. So it's a page and a half. And I apologize, Sabrina. I mean, we are socializing this real time now with the buy-side community, and started last week with the associations. But this is something that we're trying to, again, we're faced with the dilemma of either negotiating thousands of agreements with account managers or trying to, in bulk, discuss this and come to a standardized form that people could agree to. And so we're socializing that right now, and we'd certainly welcome the feedback of BlackRock and others.
Yeah, so, when you, in the assessment letter, if the credit limit agreement is between the asset manager and the clearing member, and those limits now become the responsibility of the asset manager to be able to screen. The asset manager needs a solution of how they do that. The other thing is, if I were to use, swaps as an example, because, currently we are working with 7 FCMs to get the unit of measure and to get an easy way for us to be able to check credit limits. If I were to just use that, as an example of how difficult it is to get some form of standardization, across the industry, that, it's not really fair to assume that the asset manager community or the buy side will be able to comply with that letter by June 1st.
No, I agree. I'm just stating what the rule states. So the rule states that the clearing FCM enters into agreement and the asset man or the account manager has to screen. That's what the rule says. So we're just following what the rule states. I agree that the difficulty levels are high here, but we're trying to stick to as close as what the rule. This is not something that we're imposing. It's something the rule's imposing.
And from the perspective of the FCM community, we're trying to be compliant with the rule, that the qualitative aspect of risk management between an asset manager such as yourselves and us as a clearing broker is still something that we're not trying to sidetrack. This is something that's very much part of discussion between you and your clearing brokers, and it's something that the screening agreement that we put in, particularly around 173, and then the negative consent on bunched orders, these don't override the conversations that you would have with the risk managers at your clearing brokers, because we very actively have risk management in place for your futures trading and your accounts. The wording and the approach that's been agreed with on give-ups and bunched orders allows us more flexibility around how we implement them, but we definitely implement them in discussion with yourselves.
Yeah, and the other thing, that my concern about, some of these solutions that are being proposed, today, from a best ex perspective, we can execute with a number of executing dealers, and then we are able to give up those trades on an individual account level to the primary clearing member for that fund. And as these rules they break down, one concern I have is that are we being put into a state that we can only execute with the executing dealer that is linked or affiliated with the clearing member to that fund? Because just from a pricing perspective, best ex perspective, that would not be an area that we would want to end up in.
John, any words of advice or wisdom? Or
Certainly not wisdom. Actually, I don't think that the problem that you just identified would be a problem. I mean, I think the rule contemplates that the firms decide they want to execute through firm A, they want to clear through firm B, or maybe the client wants to clear through firm B. So there's no limitation on separating out who ultimately clears from who you execute through.
So I work for a small credit fund in the city, and this Superna hit on an issue that we've recently run into, which is we spend an inordinate amount of time negotiating our prime brokerage and ISDA documents, and there's a timely fashion by which we go through it. And we've now started to negotiate these execution agreements and the underlying clearing agreements, and it's become a very long, drawn-out process. And from both a fiduciary perspective as well as an expense perspective, we're in a tough position because, for the reasons I now better understand, a lot of the clearing entities we're talking to are refusing to deal with the issue of what happens if there's a trade that's kicked back. We bear all of the risk. So as now the CEO of my firm, I need to determine with our traders, like, look, can we live with this risk? These are risks that we've clearly negotiated around in all the other trading agreements. Now we're forced to deal with these. And I don't know how to quantify that risk. And so from a fiduciary perspective, I don't know how to quantify that risk. And then from a best execution perspective, it puts us in a very tough position. So it has been an interesting 3 weeks to 4 weeks that we've been doing this, because it's forced us into a situation that we have not been in before, which is we just cannot get any reasonable discussion around the negotiation. And I don't know if that's, I mean, you guys are multiples and multiples bigger than we are, but I would argue that my situation is very similar to those folks that are coming through this June 2nd, and it's a significant problem. I just thought that was worth mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, I was, highlighting that, more from the perspective of, buy side in general. It's a risk that is not necessarily, brought to light through the regulation, but it's done through the documentation. So it's just important to note that a lot of these, risks are being passed on to the end user.
I was just told Commissioner Summers is coming down. She wants to ask a few questions on this topic. John, I think it's, if you'll share with Ananda, everyone else over in your division, the challenges we've heard here today, and if you could articulate specifically what it is you want and by when, and how you recommend they get there, I think they would find that very useful.
We'll do that.
Yeah. Have you submitted any relief requests on timing yet at this point? I know you're kind of working through it and.
No, I think, like I mentioned, in John's shop, I've been very open to discussions on this, and Ananda. So we're waiting to get more data through these letters. And again, if it's showing trends that we anticipate, then we would love to offer our help in how to develop an exceptions process to avoid these types of what I would call unnecessary rejections.
Right.
If we just have another minute, I would also like us to be able to discuss the numbers that we're seeing as far as rejections go today. I mean, obviously there's very little voluntary clearing taking place relative to mandatory clearing, and also like the March 10th date, it brought on active funds. Most of the buy side's gonna basically start to clear by June 10th. One concern that we have is if there was a market event, in which case, we would fully expect, clearing members and everyone to start tightening the limits that they've distributed to us. The level or the percentage of rejections, will go up a lot more than business as usual. And, has the Commission contemplated, what would be the state of the market if our rejection rate went from like 1%, to 5% in a day, because we will have a lot of outstanding market risk at that point, not knowing really who's going to be the bearer of the loss. And then, the other piece that, I just like, the Commission to also take into account, this rule will make the buy side lean more towards, a handful of FCMs, because we're going to want to limit any type of operational loss or market loss that we have. So is it in the best interest of the market to have a concentration of clearing members, for swap clearing, or to allow for, a little bit more of a distributed model?
This is our third panel, and this is the panel we're going to hear from the market participants. This is time to get into the big data question. Part of the challenge is making sure everybody submits all of the data correctly in the same manner, and it's harmonized and it's well understood, so when the SDR receives it, it can easily match it, compare it, analyze it, and give the Commission that same ability once we get a hold of the data. So. We've heard from a number of people in implementing Part 43, which is the real-time reporting, Part 45, which is the regulatory reporting and much more thorough, complete set of data, and Part 46, which is the historic reporting of swaps. There have been lawsuits threatened. There have been extensive discussions about who has to report to whom in the SDR community. All of which has been going on while everybody has been trying to report and trying to understand the rules and the form and the format that they have to report to the SDRs. So the first panel, I want to have the opportunity to hear from the market participants. I think we've got a good representation of different end users, buy side, sell side, et cetera, who can speak to some of these issues and the challenges they've dealt with in complying with our rules and in the timetables we've given them. So if nobody has any objection, I think we're going to start my left, your right, and just walk down the line unless you guys have already drawn straws and you have a different format. So I can't read the name tag. I think it's Dana with NextEra.
Yes, hi, Dana Smith. I'm speaking on behalf of the
Pull that
working
up
group.
closer so we can hear you.
Sorry. I'm Dana Smith. I'm speaking on behalf of the working group of commercial energy firms. My comments are not by any means on behalf of NextEra individually or any specific working group. Some of the issues that we've been facing have been with the rules, and where the rules require some data set, and then when you go to implement with the SDRs have an additional data set that they're requiring. It just makes things a little difficult to kind of communicate back and forth.
Do you want to elaborate on that? Is it, we have what the rule says, and I think, is it you're complying with what you read in the rule, and then when you submit to the data, the SDR, they're saying, well, we interpret the rule in a different way.
Well, they also have those same requirements, but they have their own requirements because they're trying to utilize existing platforms that they already have, and communicating with those SDRs previously on those existing platforms, it was only a small data set that we were, communicating. So there's issues with that, and then with the fact that, each of our ETRM systems are highly configured. They were initially out of the box, but over the years, the systems have been changed to meet the, each company's needs. And also, as products evolve over time, you're not trading the same products you were 10 years ago. And, every year a new product comes out and everybody specializes and changes their systems in their own way. And so now that we're all having to try and move everything together and standardize, whereas there's no MISMO standard right now for energy. So it's just been a longer process and a more difficult process than initially anticipated.
Are you in, I don't think we have an enforcement people. Are you in compliance, do you believe? Or, what's the status of this?
I believe everyone has done the best they possibly can to be in compliance with when April 10th was the deadline. I think the relief was much needed and appreciated, just to give us more time to ensure that the data that we are reporting is accurate. We're reporting stuff. It's just, are we reporting what you want?
Have you received any feedback from us?
Not recently.
How recently?
I said not recently, sorry.
Since reporting, or?
No.
Can you give us an example of some of the, in terms of harmonizing it? Is it the way they want it reported? Is it what's in the fields that they want reported? Is it, and it's not what they want, it's what we want, and the way they're complying and demanding of you to comply?
I think, way end users read the rule and the feedback that they've gotten has been one thing. And the way SDRs have read the rule and what they're required to do is something else. And then I think the way the CFTC meant the rule to be is probably something completely different. So it leads, users up to, you have to make assumptions and kind of document them and move forward and hope that you're doing your best.
Would a guidebook similar to what we did with large trader reporting at this level be helpful to you? I'm
sure it would be helpful, although it would take some time to get through it, but yes.
Okay. Well, this was an iterative. It was smaller than that, and then it grew. But that's the kind of one of the elements where we started with. So anything else to add on that point?
No. Thank you.
Raymond?
Thank you very much. Raymond Hansen from Credit Suisse. I think I would highlight our challenges with where we are today, and the areas we feel we've either done well or can improve in three major areas. So first is extraterritoriality. There remains a lot of challenges around the clarity of the rules. Just a check with the team the other day, we have approximately 140 use cases as a non-U.S. swap dealer that we have to ensure we comply with. That's a significant amount of complexity in our system, and that's being done without the final guidance on paper, which we'll then have to revisit. So a real challenge for us in terms of implementing a solution we can be confident in, but then also having the dependency on that final set of rules to review that. Our preference would certainly be that we can make those rules as normalized across the global jurisdictions as consistent as possible, so that we don't have one engine to meet all our obligations in the U.S., another one for the European regulations, and another one for each one of the Asian regulators, because ultimately my understanding is the goal would be to have one set of data consistently represented that any regulator who needs that when appropriate can see it. So I think that's the first concern for us. I think also that because the rules have stated single-side reporting, which is we report one side of the transaction reports is determine who the reporting parties to report, whereas when you look at the European regulations and some of the other regulations, you look at how Trace operates, it's two-side reporting. That introduces a dependency on both sides having a consistent understanding of their status as a U.S. person. Whereas if both sides are reporting, where those disagreements, where those misunderstandings, where that lack of clarity exists, at least both sides can meet their obligations from their perspective without worrying about whether or not the entire industry, from literally every dealer and every firm is in sync. So I think although it will be difficult at this point to ratchet back the single-side reporting, that is something to keep in mind as a challenge for us. I think the other to highlight would be operational issues. I think while the aspiration of having a USI on all transactions through the entire trade flow is certainly a good one in terms of providing clarity, traceability, what we've seen is it has introduced a lot of operational issues, because we now have to think about reporting, which was historically a separate logical function. You now have to think about any issue in reporting, will that have a knock-on impact on the confirmation process? And we've been working through that, making sure that as issues are identified, they're addressed, but that's certainly been a challenge for us as a firm to make sure we're one step ahead of that, and that ultimately we're not creating additional operational risk while being compliant with reporting. The third one I would talk about would really be around the focusing and the sequence. And I know, Commissioner, you've in many of your speeches talked about big data and the challenges there. The fact that we are trying to address issues across 5 major asset classes, across all the products in the asset class, makes it very difficult for us to get single products or single asset classes to what I believe is the level of detail, the level of consistency, something as simple as, is it 3M Lib, 3M LIBOR, is it 3M Space LIBOR? Something that simple, which to me is what really drives the usability of the data. To me, focusing on that and understanding the Commission's preference in terms of where we focus our efforts in the short term, rather than the broad brush approach, which we have today, where we have good faith compliance expiring in July, and therefore our focus has to be on all the issues and all the product types and all the asset classes. So any guidance we can receive in terms of where to focus our efforts as an industry, I think would help allow us to get some of those key product sets in a healthier state and the data in a more usable state.
You want to touch on the USI issue? I don't understand that as well. So can you explain what the challenge?
So the challenge with the USI is that there is a requirement that the USI is, first of all, generated based on the determination of who is the reporting party. So in single-side reporting, two sides of the trade, one side, that decision then is used to drive the namespace of the USI. And that namespace ties then back to the U.S. jurisdictions. So we have a dependency on, first of all, it being a U.S. counterparty involved in the trade, and then you generate the USI. You need to place that USI on things like the confirmations, for example. By doing that, what you're doing is introducing a dependency on successful reporting of the trade, or your reporting system being operational. For non-swap dealers, the SDR is responsible for creating the USI. So you now have an operational challenge of not only ensuring that the trade was successfully processed internally, but that the round trip to the SDR was successful. They return back the USI that they generated. You then need to apply that on the confirmation, which operationally means essentially you have to ensure that your systems can handle that state, managing that state, or handle the ability to wait for a successful USI before processing the trade further downstream. So it's something we are working through, but it's certainly something that may have been either an unintended consequence or just a challenge in terms of making sure that meeting reporting obligations does not impact our ability to issue a confirmation to clients and ultimately move the money at the end of the day.
On the issue related to 3M LIBOR, just the harmonization of data is something that Dana talked about as well. Do you have any recommendations? What can we do to help you on that?
So I think the challenge, and I speak for Credit Suisse, but certainly I would assume across the industry, is the number of products, with 5 asset classes and the number of products, there is a limitation in terms of how many experts you can actually throw at this and solve the problems collectively as an industry in a relatively short period of time. So I would think that having a focus on a certain set of products where we're really looking to get that data consistent, get the industry mobilized to focus on those, knowing that that's where you want to see the energy spent, rather than working on good faith compliance all the way out to wind down businesses and other trades that you may print a trade once or twice a week. The value of that in the real-time tape is most likely much less than getting consistent data on those trades that are printed in high volume. So helping us to understand your focus areas and where you'd like us to, as an industry to focus over the next 6 to 12 months.
John?
I'm John Lifton. I'm General Counsel and Managing Director of the D.E. Shaw Group. I appreciate the chance to be here and give our perspective on some of these SDR reporting issues. Just by way of background, we are a buy-side firm. We serve predominantly institutional investors. We have over 1,000 employees. We're based in New York, but we have offices across the globe. And we have a significant presence in the world's capital markets. We have been a strong advocate of many of the Dodd-Frank reforms, including central clearing of liquid and standardized swaps and reporting to the CFTC and the SEC. We believe that this will advance Dodd-Frank's objectives of promoting market integrity, increasing transparency, and fostering competition. Now, we've invested many months and many person hours in getting ourselves ready for swap clearing and reporting. And we already cleared at this point several hundred interest rate and credit swaps since the mandatory clearing requirement has been put in place. And I would just observe that the burdens that we've been subjected to do this have been far in excess of the estimates that the Commission put forth for people like us, non-swap dealer, non-major swap participants. And in addition to what I just said, we're also voluntarily clearing more swap products than are currently required by your clearing mandate. We consistently support reasonable reporting requirements because we think it's important that regulators have meaningful data on which to base policy decisions. I know that's something you've been addressing. And also firms like us want to have better information to manage our investors' portfolios. As we've moved into the implementation stage, though, it hasn't been without challenges, and we wanted to give a few observations based on our experience that we hope will help you in your oversight and supervision of these reforms. A key element to ensuring market confidence in these systems is to ensure that all the parties involved in overseeing swap trades, I'm talking about DCOs and SDRs, SROs, that they have robust systems and processes for the protection of confidential data in place prior to...
John, can you pull your microphone a little closer?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Sorry. Prior to commencing the clearing and reporting of swaps. Now, by way of example, and you may know this, we and a number of other firms recently had certain sensitive swap data exposed when a systems error at one of the SDRs inadvertently allowed some market participants to access data related to certain cleared swaps. Now, I don't mean to overstate this. It was not a Twitter attack. It was, we believe, an isolated instance, but it certainly got our attention. I know it got the attention of the SDR, and we just think it's an example of what can go wrong as we begin to try out these new processes. Another example of the challenges, we experienced certain difficulties in trying to prepare our own systems for reporting on April 10th, and in particular, we weren't really able to have an opportunity to perform sufficient testing of the swap reporting system in a timely fashion. Now, we appreciate that the Commission's just-in-time extension of the deadline for historical reporting, and we hope that that additional time will be used by the SDRs to allow for greater testing of swap reporting functionality and provide them time to test for confidentiality, security, and the readiness of the systems in general. I'm sure you know this, but I just want to emphasize that these trade details are very sensitive market data. They require the investment of significant research, time, and resources on our part to create. And we consider this proprietary information highly valuable because if a third party were to get access to it, they could reverse engineer it and emulate our trading strategies, or with knowledge of our positions, use it to trade against us, or both. And our intellectual property is absolutely critical to our franchise. It's the principal reason that investors entrust us with their money. So that's why I'm here to make this point. What we would ask of you is that you work closely with the new SDRs to ensure that they strengthen their systems and confidentiality protection of the trade data that's reported to them. I would respectfully suggest that these procedures could include ongoing surveillance and monitoring of the SDR's user access, routine testing of the systems, rigorous supervisory procedures and obligations, third-party validation of their information security and privacy controls, and timely self-reporting obligations in the event of information security breaches or leaks. We believe that strong confidentiality protections like these will foster an atmosphere of stability and trust among the regulators and market participants. I would just also note that a side issue that relates to this is with the reporting forums like PF, CPO, PQR, and other forms regulators, such as yourselves, as well as the SEC, the FSOC, and the SROs, are receiving a tremendous amount of systemic risk information from market participants. We believe that privacy data protection has to extend to regulators and SROs as well, and we hope that that will be a key focus for all the regulators. I'm aware that the Managed Funds Association is planning to submit a letter very shortly that raises these issues and provides specific recommendations along these lines. So to conclude, we want to see swap reporting and clearing implemented successfully, as does the Commission and the DCOs and the SDRs. As implementation unfolds, we do expect there will be hiccups. We realize not all of them can be prevented. However, we think with careful oversight and further rulemaking by the CFTC, many of these potential pitfalls can be avoided in the future. And we think a seamlessly functioning national system of swap reporting and clearing will encourage other market participants to clear and report swaps. And this will, in turn, result in increased market stability and benefit all market participants. So thank you very much for the chance to address these issues.
Thank you very much. I think those are, in light of what we're going to be talking about later today, very important as well to maintain the privacy at the SDR and in this building as well. So thank you very much for those comments. Tara.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Tara Cruz. I work at Morgan Stanley, and I'm here today on behalf of the International Swaps and Derivatives Association. I think in terms of the issue of further data standardization in SDRs, to me, the largest challenge that we have faced and will face in further standardization is really coordinating a large number and array of market participants, right? We've got large and small swap dealers. We have end users, financial and non-financial parties, middleware providers, CCPs, execution platforms, a myriad of industry participants who, frankly, have different technological levels of sophistication sophistication and capacity. They frankly have different views and interpretations on what the rules mean and how they should be complying with them. And unfortunately, we all are very much integrated. It's a complex web. Every trade may involve several market participants, and unless they agree on exactly what's supposed to happen with respect to that trade, it is difficult to get to further data standardization. To the extent that any of those parties take a different interpretation, it makes it very difficult to comply with the rules. And as we breach into more global regulation and other regulators are looking to fulfill their G20 requirements, it becomes a situation where we have multi-jurisdictional reporting across the board. So that web of complexity continues to increase. We have more participants from more jurisdictions who are all looking to have sort of a singular solution. And I think as we look to improve data standardization, we have to take in consideration multi-jurisdictional reporting. We can't have a different data standard for CFTC reporting versus other global regulators. We need some global coordination on this. I would also emphasize that time to market in terms of additional changes is very important. We are now live. We're in production. We have a very complicated and integrated system that is helping us comply with our current reporting requirements. And to the extent we seek to make changes to improve that are necessary and appropriate, we have to make sure those are implemented in a reasonable time frame that takes into consideration that complexity, the fact that it's serving multiple jurisdictions, and then we don't want to risk impacting what we've already built and impact our abilities to deliver what we're currently delivering to you. So I think proper change order management really has to be considered so that we phase in additional changes for standardization over time.
Now, in your capacity, it is this is not organizing the industry is not foreign to you all. So what opportunities can you take to help organize either standardization, some of these phasing requirements, common language issues? What's being done on that front to help things
Well, I
along?
think trade organizations, trade associations like ISDA have been really key so far, right, and will continue to be important. They are the means by which we bring together different market participants to try to solve these issues and come to agreement. But frankly, there's different organizations that represent different market participants. Not all participants come to the table, and frankly, despite our efforts to always get folks to agree, you don't always come to agreement. People have a different view, and in the end, it does require some further clarification and assistance from yourself in order to get us all on the same page and ensure we are all complying with what your expectations are.
Is there an expectation that you could help us with a guidebook?
I think guidebooks are great, frankly. I mean, I know it's a lot of work. It's something that has been brought up in conversation with some of your staff along the way, that because there are many different interpretations and many nuances to reporting, that having a guidebook would be useful. And we understand that because of all you've had on your plate, it wasn't something you were able to produce previously. But I think it is something as an industry we would welcome, and we would welcome your encouragement of all market participants to comply with what those guidelines are. I would also suggest that we make sure that to the extent that guidebook indicates changes to what we currently have in place, that we have a phased-in approach that works for all market participants. You know, it's one thing for a swap dealer to implement a change, perhaps in a few months' time frame, but a smaller market participant may not have the same capacity. So we have to take into consideration time to market for all participants.
Ed.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to participate here today. My name is Ed Prosser. I'm the Vice President of Ag Trading for Gavilon. I'm here today on behalf of Gavilon and also on behalf of the Commodity Markets Council, of which we are a member. CMC is a trade association that brings together exchanges and their industry counterparts. The activities of CMC members include a complete spectrum of commercial end users of all futures markets, including energy and ag. Our comments represent a collective view of CMC members. Gavilon is a supply chain management company that manages risk across the commodity spectrum. We are constantly in the market trying to find the optimal hedge. Most often, we find that in the organized futures exchanges. Infrequently, the best hedge is a swap. More often than not, a cleared swap. But we do find at times that non-cleared swaps are counterparties or entities that we tend not to be swap dealers or major swap participants. Dodd-Frank established a reporting regimen for swaps, which the CFTC has begun to implement. The reporting structure is complicated and confusing, particularly in regards to swaps between end users, something that is very common in physical commodity swaps. I don't think the Commission has an appreciation for the diversity of swap terms. If they could be standardized, they would be futurized. I know that part of the unspoken thought regarding swaps is that many are standardized, which may be true, especially in some of the financial products. But in the agricultural world, as was true in 2000 when CFMA was passed, there are still swaps being executed with customized terms on a daily basis by companies like Gavilon. While we fully support transparent and access to market data by regulators for robust market oversight, we question the value to the Commission of the vast expansion of data collection we've seen. Trying to turn the data that we report into information that is accurate scares us. A bushel of corn is 56 pounds. A bushel of beans is 60 pounds. A bushel of oats is 32 pounds. A ton here is 2,000 pounds. A ton in England is 2,200 pounds. A ton in the rest of the world is 2,204.6 pounds. The idea that we try to get all of that data pushed through and somebody makes conclusions, I don't know if we can even get the quantities of these swaps to standard. And the idea that we report that information and there are some conclusions made about that information that might not be accurate concerns us. Two examples of Dodd-Frank related initiatives come to mind that are very troubling to Gavilon, the CMC, and the entire commercial place. The first issue appeared in the position limits final rule that was ultimately struck down by the courts. The rule required the reporting of daily physical positions to justify hedge exemptions, which under the rule were only available to commercial market participants, rather than the historical requirement of monthly physical position reporting. The change would be virtually impossible for a global commodities firm to comply with. The industry viewed the change as unnecessary and overly burdensome, given that the Commission has always had the ability to ask for data to justify a hedge exemption. Does the Commission really have the resources, given all the new market oversight responsibility, to analyze 30 times the data? Was there an issue with the monthly reporting regimen that would be resolved by daily positions being reported? We implore the CFTC to retain the historical requirement to report monthly positions in the new position limits proposal. The second significant expansion of current data requirements beyond the scope of Dodd-Frank is related to record-keeping requirements in Part 1 of Commission regulations. In accordance with Dodd-Frank, the CFTC expanded the record-keeping requirements that existed for certain market participants in futures to swaps. However, they also significantly expanded the written requirements, as well as created new requirement to record oral conversations. Compliance costs have already been incredibly substantial now that compliance with the written requirements is mandatory and will only increase once compliance with the oral recording requirements becomes mandatory later this year. Again, the market is searching for a reason all of this new information must be maintained and archived. In addition, the rule is vague as to which communication must be retained. So in an abundance of caution, market participants are effectively saving everything. Requests for clarification have not yet been answered. The CMC will be submitting a written request soon in a continuing effort to clarify and hopefully narrow the scope of what must be retained and therefore reduce compliance costs. I hope the Commission will consider the idea of how many transactions, how much contact between counterparties goes in to make all of these swaps come together and define further what leads to the execution of a transaction. The development of systems in order to comply would be extremely burdensome and costly on non-swap dealers and end users. To Gavilon, it matters not that less than 1% of our transactions would be subject to the new reporting requirements. We would have to change our IT systems to handle all the required information, whether it is for one swap or 1,000. I suspect that our situation is similar to other companies in the same market position as us. The days of submitting a handwritten note on exceptions are behind us. When you think about the cost of compliance, when spread over such few transactions, you can appreciate the cost of our compliance. The economics of compliance, coupled with the complexity of reporting, has sent us a strong signal to simply use futures. When you add on the unknown potential risk associated with non-compliance around swap reporting, the message to us to use only futures is amplified. Reporting will force an increase in transaction costs, and ultimately that cost will be passed on to consumers. In closing, we fully support the CFTC's effort to implement Dodd-Frank, bring the OTC markets into a regulated environment, and generate transparency in opaque markets. However, we implore the Commission to do so in a realistic manner that considers the regulatory benefits versus the market costs, and not to overly burden the end users these markets were created for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then Greg Wood will.
Thank you very much, Commissioner O'Malley. Just for the record, I'm here representing the FIA in my capacity as President of the IT Division, and also as the co-chair of the Fixed Protocol Organization's Global Derivatives Committee. I was asked by various people at the FIA to just come and give a little sort of view on this topic, not specifically from the view of swap data repositories, but more from the issue of reporting requirements and data requirements. So looking ahead, looking behind, we have large trader reporting where we have a guidebook that is very thick. Yes. We have conversations about swap data repositories and the quality of data that is going into those repositories and its usability. In the future, we also have OCR coming, ownership, control, and reporting. So these are very big requirements for many participants in the markets, not just across swaps, but also for the FCMs, for the buy side as well. These requirements touch every participant in the marketplace. And the thing that we would like to ask or emphasize is we need to look at this in some sort of holistic manner. There's a lot of information here that actually overlaps. And there are certain parts that are specific to particular requirements with regards to swaps and the challenges around representing swaps and whether they can be normalized or they remain bespoke. But there are also there's a lot of details around who the participants are, particular details around transactions. These are things that can, if we were to standardize approaches around particular discrete elements of our reporting requirements, we can actually reduce the cost of being compliant quite considerably across the firms. And I think that is something that everyone in this room is probably looking towards. We have ever-increasing budgets with regards to our regulatory requirements. And whatever we can utilize in multiple places is definitely of benefit to all of the participants in this room. So how do we do that? That's really where we're asking the question here. We don't expect someone, for example, like John Rogers, to provide us with a spec to say, this is the data that I require. I mean, some guidelines would definitely be very useful, but then it comes up to the industry associations, whether it's ISDA, whether it's Fixed Protocol, whether it's even FIA working as a coordination across the FCMs to then actually meet those data requirements. And I'm sure, we can work together. I mean, often there is not going to be agreement, as Tara highlighted, but I think in general, if we have guidance and we have a goal to what we can do, we can certainly work together to actually meet the requirements and hopefully then present something that is usable and not just a massive overhead in terms of time and expense. So really, that's the gist of where I'm trying to come to here is like, there are a lot of overlapping parts. There are discrete components that I think we can easily work on together to identify participants, to identify transactions. And then there's instrument details, there's economic details that may be more bespoke to certain types of data that then we can work with within the certain organizations that look after those particular areas that then we can fit into a wider framework that then you can use.
Thank you very much. In trying to keep us on time, we're butting up against lunch, but I just want to kind of summarize some of these things, and I hope you all stay for the next panel, which will be after lunch, where the SDRs will be in place to help. And John Rogers and Rick Schiltz are going to be here to kind of frame the debate about the challenges we're facing. We've heard from you about your challenges, and let me just tick off the themes that I heard. Harmonization, operational challenges, privacy, kind of the complexity of all of this. There's a time and phase-in that we need to recognize, as well as size. I think somebody's mentioned the size of the entity is going to matter in how we mandate this. Multi-jurisdictional, I think that's an issue that probably we need to get our house in order, but understanding where other jurisdictions are in this debate and how we're going to meet up with them. The chairman's talked about the multi-jurisdictional goal that he wants to solve. That's great, but maybe we can touch on that a little later on. But I think our problem is right in front of us, just dealing with our own rules. And then the standardization and costs that you all solved, and the best way to solve this. I mean, who's going to be in the room to sit down, identify what it is we want, and then what it is you can provide, and if everybody agrees on the term and terminology on that. Before we leave, let's just keep that in mind, and we'll talk to our SDR panels. If anybody wants to make a comment about anything they've heard today about this or anything else, go ahead and do it now. Otherwise, we're going to talk about it. Adam?
Yeah, just a question. When we were working on the guidelines for the swap data repository reporting in the Data Standardization Subcommittee, one of the things that was very clear was that it was intended that the SDRs should be setting the standard for what was reported to them to be able to answer the questions that the CFTC was going to ask of the SDRs. Yet, I'd say approximately half of the members of this panel have said they were confused at their interpretation of the rules was different than the SDR. And it was my impression that there was no room for the reporting parties to have any interpretation whatsoever of the rules, and that was supposed to be done. The SDR is supposed to say, this is what you're going to report to us if we're going to be the SDR. That has nothing to do with the timing or who reports, where I fully understand the questions. And then there was supposed to be a negotiation between the SDRs and the commission over what data could be reported when to the commission for usefulness. And the rule was sort of written that way, because the SDR, each SDR was allowed to set its own standards. Now I'm hearing that people are confused as to what they should report to the SDR, and I'm wondering why people are feeling that confusion if the SDR is supposed to be saying, this is my standard.
Yeah, I'd just like to, add to the cost and standardization if accessibility of the data could also be included, because market participants may have requirements to be able to reconcile the data, and being a user of the SDRs, it hasn't actually been easy, or I should say successful, to be able to get the data, which would be the first step for us to be able to reconcile what's what the SDRs have.
That's a great point. We've heard anecdotally that some people have submitted data, getting access to their data, what they submitted is incomplete or not there. Has anybody else had that problem?
It's not easy to identify the data where it came from. It's one of the issues that we've experienced. Then the other piece of it is, it's unclear if the SDR, your own data, if that should be available free of cost or not, and what type of agreements are you required to sign, and is there like indemnification from privacy breaches and things like that that are in those agreements, which become problematic again.
If I could address more to the first question, I've had less interaction with the SDRs around pulling back our data. I think there's really two issues. One issue is, as a firm, we have historic, I'll call them mappings, and information. The way we structure trades is different, as Tara mentioned, than pretty much every other firm has a unique way somewhere in their systems across the breadth of the products. So there are areas where we as a firm need to identify where things are not mapped the way the SDR would have them reported and resolve those. The challenge really for us is doing that across every asset class, every product, out to the most bespoke in very, very short time frames, as opposed to being able to focus. I think on the flip side, you then also have the challenge for I agree in principle that, the SDRs have access to CFTC, they can clarify, but you do have issues around multi-jurisdiction where a flag may be mandatory for one jurisdiction, optional for another. So we've had, many dialogues with the DCC, for example, trying to understand what's the appropriate flag to set. Is it required? Is it not required? As well as information where we may be providing a piece of information that, from a purely technical perspective, it's difficult for them out of, call them potentially hundreds of trade attributes on a single trade, whether or not we provided, quote unquote, the appropriate value, in terms of, for their systems to actually validate them. So I think at a broad level it works, but at a very technical implementation level, it is a challenge, because clearly not every field we're passing is being validated for every jurisdiction. That would be an extremely complex ask, especially as you get out beyond the more vanilla products.
Yeah, I think I would add on that too. I mean, it's definitely been a collaborative process between market participants and some of the SDRs in terms of determining how data is reported. But at the end of the day, the SDRs, have administrative pieces they're working at around validation of certain fields. So, for instance, they may need to make a certain field optional just because it doesn't apply to all transactions. But from my perspective, I'm always going to turn back to my rules to say, oh, for this particular type of transaction, I'm required to report it. So I can't always rely on them to tell me what makes me compliant. At the end of the day, I think as firms, we always feel like it's going to come back to us. I can't point to the SDR and say, well, they didn't make me report this, so it's their fault I'm not compliant. Rather, we take the responsibility on ourselves and work together with them to make sure that the availability is there to report everything we believe we need to report, and then we take it on ourselves to analyze the rules and understand what we believe will make us compliant in case we need to speak to what we have done.
We're pretty close to on schedule, believe it or not. Housekeeping, all the panelists and all the TAC members are invited upstairs for lunch, and we will see you all at 1:30. Thank you.